Hello AP Statistics. In this video, we're going to talk about categorical data and their graphs just a little bit. So the first thing I want to talk about is this idea of a frequency table. Well, a frequency table just shows you how many individuals you have measuring in a certain variable, okay, for each value. So that's easy peasy. That's just a count. How many of you like the color blue? This many. How many of you like the color purple? It's all good. Okay, so relative frequency table then takes those values and changes them to a proportion or a percentage. Sometimes if you're looking at two sets of data that are vastly different in size, but you want to know how many of these people like blue or purple and how many of these other people like blue or purple, well, if your two groups of people that you're looking at or two groups of individuals that you're looking at are vastly different, meaning that you've got a group of 60 people over here and a group of 20 over here, well, if you're just looking at straight counts, it's going to look like you're not getting a good representation of what's actually going on. So you'll want to look at the percentages since you've got two groups that are so vastly different in their sizes. Okay, a two-way table is just a table of counts that summarize our data in relationship between two categorical variables or more. It could be more than two categorical variables. So we're going to look at a couple of these. Pie charts are pretty easy, just your standard, hey, what's the percentage of this, what's the percentage of this, etc., etc. So you got your little percentages and it's all color-coded and whatnot. Pictographs are just little pictures. Sometimes those can be misleading if they're not, drawn to scale, etc., etc., to represent what they're supposed to represent. Dot plots, of course, as the name would imply, however many you have at each value, etc., etc. Those are pretty easy. Bar graphs, they're really, really easy. I'm going to show you one of those. Side-by-side bar graphs, that's actually what I'm going to show you, and then you'll be able to see what a regular bar graph would look like. Your segmented bar graphs and your mosaic plots. So I'm going to show you a couple of pictures of these items so that you'll understand better this idea of the association. Because remember that there's an association between two variables if one of them can help predict the value of the other. So what this means is if two variables have an association, in other words, if knowing one thing helps me predict another thing, then they have an association. This is also known to be not independent. In other words, my two variables are not independent of one another because one of them can predict the other. So that is what I'm talking about as far as having an association. If you have two groups that are not independent, I can't use my words. If you have two variables that are not independent of one another, they have an association. If you have two variables that are independent, they do not have an association. They're independent of one another. You can't use one to predict the other because they don't have anything to do with each other. All right, so let me pull up my picture here. All right, so I've got a table here. I've got favorite subject, math, English, science in my table, and I've got them separated by male, female. So as you can see in the picture here, I've got a segmented bar graph. It makes sense to put these in percentages since we're stacking values on top of one another here. So you can see by the picture that how males and females compare to each other. So a question might be here, are male and female, so gender, is gender and favorite subject, are those independent of one another? Do they have an association? Well, if you'll notice, more males like, or a higher percentage of males like math than the females. So because these colors are not matching up, that would indicate to you that the percentage of favorite subject may be dependent on gender, meaning gender and favorite subject might have an association because these colors aren't lining up together, all right? You would anticipate that they would be approximately the same for male and female if gender doesn't have anything to do with favorite subject choice. Okay, so now let's look at a mosaic plot. As you can see, the female portion is much wider than the male portion, and if you'll notice down here in the summary statistics, there are 58 females and 35 males. So a mosaic plot gives you a nice picture of what's happening in relation to how many people you have in each group. So that's really nice. And then, of course, we have a side-by-side bar graph. So side-by-side bar graph just means I've got two separate bar graphs here, one for the males and one for the females. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of what your categorical graphs would look like.